was bad enough.
Oh, good.
3
Did
flights
we
of stairs.
suffer?
Yeah,
or
that was a
what?
nightmare.
Together?
The lift is broken and we had to walk up. We needed a Sherpa just to come up those stairs. I was exhausted.
The lift is broken for 2 weeks, folks, around the country. So we are getting a lot of cardio exercise here at RNZ. Very good. 5 away from 5. Carl says, in order to make money, someone else has to lose money. And the more successful you are at making money, the more other people are at losing money. The ultimate recognition that you have reached the top is when everyone else is poor. So a fair bit coming out around this idea of capitalist camps. Just on a bit of a different note here, I did want to bring this one up. It's a bit of a sad story, but I do want to sort of raise it. The Auckland City Mission says there's been a 28% jump in demand for food parcels, and the colder weather is to blame. People's costs are going up and there's little money left for food. I just wanted to go around the panel. I mean, this seems to be an ongoing issue, but it's just getting so much worse. I mean, this is not even a Christmas story, Ellie.
No.
And yet,
No, it's winter. It's a winter story, though.
Yeah.
Look, my partner works for Kids Can, for a charity, and she was asked the other day, I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, she was asked the other day what is driving the main issue that the families that she works with is. That's a badly constructed sentence. And she said housing. Underlying everything, really? Housing. All of the knock-on effects, the lack of food, the inability to heat your house, which is why people are going to the City Mission for food parcels, all of that chain of events comes from unaffordable housing.
So it's housing-based. It's a housing-based thing. 1 million parcels nearly given out, 28% rise.
Yeah. And
if you were in charge of the country, how might you fix it?
Ooh. Oh well, cool. Let's fix it. Let's fix it now, right? Well, I would no. It's you gotta look after, and you gotta look after the people that need it more than everyone else. So if money is being spent on different, like, I don't know what a lot of money is getting spent on, but you really got to look after it. You see Queen Street and you walk up and down there and you see the homeless problem and the price of food as well. You need to sort that out, and sort out housing. But yeah.
One of the things that really came through in this piece for me was it wasn't just the sort of the real poor, but also the middle class poor as well, Ellie, who just don't have that. I mean, as salaries are staying the same and increases are rising every year, there's that sort of bit in the middle that you can't. You need to get a loan to cover it.
Most of us are a couple of just disasters, I don't know, car breaks down irreparably, somebody dies and you have to pay for a funeral, or you have to fly to a loved one's bedside and, it's thousands of miles. A couple of those within a few months
and that's today,
and you're poor.
You haven't got that backstop.
I would be, if that was, if I had that kind of misfortune on top of... I don't think people realise, even when you earn a good wage, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're completely secure.
Very good, very good response. Great panel. Melita says the date that got cancelled so he could wash his car. Lol. It was a classic HQ Holden, I suppose, and I owned Next Day Falcon. Shortest romance ever. What a great panel you've both been. Alan McElroy and Ali Moore, thank you very much for being Fridays. You shakeless high fives all around.
Oh, yeah.
All right, very good.
That's great.
I'm Wallace Chapman. See you Monday, 3:45 sharp. Bye.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, the lunchtime lie down, that's a wake-up call on climate change. Thousands of young people skipped class today in a bid to teach decision makers a lesson. So who was listening? Do the dollars at Destiny Church add up? We open the big book. No, not the Bible, the accounts. And the self-appointed champion of the regions drops a lot of green on the Gold Cycle Trail. Otara residents demand answers from the police after a spate of shootings. And who's the lowlife who pinched a bunch of bonsai trees nurtured over 4 decades by their 93-year-old owner?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Thousands of children skipped classes today to join protests calling for urgent action on climate change. The first of a wave of protests planned in at least 110 countries, the school strike for climate prompted rallies in more than 20 towns and cities throughout New Zealand. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Strike organisers urged Parliament to declare a climate emergency and change the zero carbon bill to make the goal for net zero emissions 2040 rather than 2050. In Wellington, speakers warned that humanity has just 10 years to limit global warming to an average of 1.5 degrees. Students at the rally told RNZ there is still time to avert the worst effects of climate change, but adults need to start acting now. The Green MP, Chloe Swarbrick, told the crowd her party had drafted a climate emergency declaration. Called John Gerritsen TNA.
The Prime Minister says she's proud of New Zealand's response to climate change, even though today's protesters called on the government to do more, for instance by toughening up the zero carbon bill. Jacinda Ardern says the bill puts into action many of New Zealand's international obligations.
Ultimately, though, we will only achieve that goal if everyone globally is playing their role. There is no room for delay or error, and I can see why young people of the world are calling for greater urgency, because not everyone is committing to the action we need now.
Jacinda Ardern. However, students at Auckland's protest say more strikes will follow if their demands are not met. The message from those lying down on Queen Street was that the government needs to wake up.
The government needs to wake up and needs to wake up now.
A change actually needs to be made. It actually takes all of us as youth to realise that we have the power to do something about it.
I think that our generation as a whole feels the urgency of it a lot more than perhaps other generations, and feels that it's something that's now our responsibility.
Meanwhile, it's emerged that the Auckland Council is to consider declaring a climate emergency. The chair of its Environment Committee, Penny Hulse, said today she expects the declaration to pass next month. She says it won't have any legal force, but will put climate considerations front and centre of future council decisions.
This isn't just an empty gesture, we can back it with the actions, and at that same meeting we will be hopefully signing off for consultation our climate change action plan. Think about future generations, and you're either going to care about those generations or make a statement that you're not.
The Nelson, Christchurch and Canterbury councils have already declared climate emergencies, as have hundreds of cities around the world, including London and Vancouver. In other news, the police say they've seized more than 30 guns in South Auckland in the wake of shootings and gang violence. There's been more than a dozen shootings in the area over the past year, the most recent being a fatal one in Otara last Friday. The county's Manukau area commander, Wendy Spiller, says officers have now carried out 30 search warrants and recovered guns and drugs. She's urging people to get in touch with the police if they find guns.
Gang violence and guns are unacceptable, and that we don't want any in any community, but particularly in suburban and urban communities, and that the behaviour and actions that the community accept.
In a Facebook Live session with the community, the police have said that up to 6 weeks ago, crime was tracking down in the area. Clutha's Mayor has welcomed a major investment in the district's cycle trail, which is getting $6.5 million from the Provincial Growth Fund. Brian Cadogan says the District Council is thrilled by today's announcement.
Today is not only significant, both tangibly but psychologically, because this sprint becomes a relay team. In the Provincial Growth Fund, we have found a partner to run at our side. The impetus this gives us to our aspirations and our dreams to propel the district forward really means something.
Other Otago projects to be given Provincial Growth Fund money today include Dunedin's construction industry and a potential adventure park in Cromwell. One of rock music's most notorious injustices has finally been resolved. For the past 22 years, the British band The Verve haven't made a penny from their 1997 hit song Bittersweet Symphony, having forfeited the royalties to the Rolling Stones. The song was embroiled in a legal battle shortly after its release because the band had sampled an orchestral version of the Stones song The Last Time. As a result, writer Richard Ashcroft had to sign over his rights to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, who have now signed them back. Ashcroft says the Stones' late manager, Alan Klein, was responsible for the situation rather than Jagger and Richards, with whom he never had a personal beef. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. Dane Coles will make his return to rugby tomorrow. The Hurricanes hooker will start for his Wellington club Pōneke in their final round Swindale Shield match against Petone. Coles has been sidelined with a calf injury since the middle of March. The Canes are on their second Super Rugby bye week before heading to South Africa to play the Sharks and the Lions. The Chiefs play their final home game of the season against the Queensland Reds in Hamilton tonight. Ufuk Tale has made a long-term commitment to the Wellington Phoenix. The A-League Football Club's third coach in as many seasons has arrived in the capital, fresh from helping to guide Sydney FC to their year's title. Unlike his predecessor Mark Rudin, Tale says his family will be moving across the Tasman.
I'm here for the long haul, and I think I'm already showing that by bringing my family over to Wellington as well. So, like I said, I want the club to be successful. You know, I want the fans to enjoy the football that they see on the weekends, and I want them to back us all the way.
A handful of Phoenix squad members are currently on international duty with the New Zealand under-20 side, who will play Honduras in their World Cup opener in Poland tomorrow morning. Commonwealth Games mountain bike champion Sam Gaze will return from injury for the second round of the World Cup in the Czech Republic this weekend. The 23-year-old had originally planned to miss the race after being concussed at an event in South Africa in March. But after 3 weeks of training, he says he's been given the medical all clear to ride. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, some of New Zealand's finest perform Lennon and McCartney in this week's Friday Night Live act. Country Life is cleaning up our waterways with wood chips, while Ben Ruck introduces us to the element iridium, because traces of iridium is the smoking gun that points to a meteorite wiping out the dinosaurs. We have a sonic tonic dedicated to evidence. So if you haven't a clue what to do after the news at 7, tune to Nights with me, Brian Crump, on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Peninsula and Central High Country. Partly cloudy with areas of morning fog. Isolated showers from Taranaki and Taumaranui southwards, and also about the east coast from Northland to Coromandel until tomorrow afternoon. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine weather apart from some cloudy periods. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine weather. Otago and Southland, occasional showers about Stewart Island, elsewhere fine, but becoming cloudy tomorrow afternoon with isolated late showers about the remainder of coastal Southland. For Bulla and Westland, cloud increasing, isolated showers about Westland from this evening, spreading to Bulla tomorrow afternoon with rain setting in to the southern Westland. Fiordland, mostly cloudy with showers, rain setting in tomorrow and becoming heavy. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Thousands of children called on adults to get real about climate change in mass protests around the country today. Students from secondary schools, primary schools and even early childhood centres skipped classes for the second school strike for climate. They say the world is in the midst of an emergency and the government needs to do a lot more to help limit the extent of global warming. Here's our education correspondent John Gerritsen with camera operators Dom Thomas, Simon Rogers and Dan Cook.
Children as young as 4 gathered in the capital today, determined to have their voices heard. 8-year-old Zoe Carew from Belmont Primary School in Lower Hutt has a clear view of the problem.
If we still have petrol cars, then because the pollution goes up and makes the blanket more thicker, and that means it's more warmer, and then there's the seas rising because the ice is melting.
Emily Barr from St Oran's College says she and her friends want urgent action on climate change.
We just all think that climate change is just such a big thing to take notice for, since if we don't act now, it will be irreversible. And, the planet is dying, so we need to act fast.
In Christchurch, more than 200 students and parents gathered in Hagley Park. Dozens of pupils from Christchurch Girls High School were out in force, including Year 13 student Mila Batten, who says she's sick of governments putting big business ahead of the environment.
Government should be protecting the interests of its people as a whole, and when there are governments who are placing the needs of a few rich CEOs and their businesses over the welfare of our entire planet and every inhabitant in it. It's a little bit ridiculous.
The first climate strike in March was cut short by news of the mosque attacks, and a Muslim community advocate was among the first to speak in Christchurch. Zahra Husseini says she was impressed by the big turnout and hopes world leaders listen to their message. She says the environment is emphasised in her religion, and people in the Muslim community know how important it is to New Zealand youth.
I'm sure they're actually, very happy that this is happening, because everyone is concerned about what's happening in the environment, and we are with you in this. We're all one.
In Nelson, hundreds of students joined the protest. They gathered on the church steps before chanting their way down Trafalgar Street, earning praise and applause from onlookers. 14-year-old Holly Druce from Motueka High School says she skipped school to be there.
I don't feel I should be at school when this sort of thing's happening and we could all be dead within the next 10 years or so.
Ruby Vidgen, a Year 12 student from Nayland College, says the school's principal and teachers encouraged students to take part in what they said was a strike for their future. She says while the climate crisis might not seem as urgent to New Zealanders, we have a responsibility to act for the sake of others who are already suffering from the effects.
Sea levels are already rising, people are losing their houses, the pollution and the air quality is just unlivable. And so it's important for us, because we are able and we're privileged enough to have a government that listens to us, to spread our message for them and for us.
In Auckland, about 1,000 fired-up students shut down entire blocks of Queen Street, lying down together as a symbolic message to adults to wake up. Western Springs College student Luke Weejohn was one of the organisers.
I'm here, and I think every kid is here because we're scared. We look into the future and we can see the reports coming out of the UN, and we know it's not good enough. We're not going to have a future if we don't do more for climate change.
Luke Weejohn says adults have been asleep at the wheel for 30 years, having known about climate change and done little to stop its destruction.
I think if you go to any school and ask kids what is the most important thing to them, what issue do they think is clouding their minds the most, I'd say climate change. And that's why we've got kids who are risking detentions, risking losing credits, risking threats of suspensions to come here to send that message that this is the most important thing to them and they want their country to do more.
4 pupils from Westlake Girls High School said they had no qualms with leaving school for the day and said their school allowed them to without consequence.
We feel like it's at this point it's more important to be here fighting for climate change, against it, than it is to receive an education that might not even be useful in the future if there is no future.
They said they were proud that young people are so passionate about driving for change.
I think that our generation as a whole feels the urgency of it a lot more than perhaps other generations, and feels that it's something that's now our responsibility, and especially following obviously the Zero Carbon Act just passed, and it's not enough, and I feel like we all feel that it's our responsibility to make sure that there is stuff done because it needs to happen.
The Wellington protest marched through the city, blocking cars and briefly carbon emissions from Lambton Quay. At Parliament, student leaders urged MPs to declare a climate emergency and move the Zero Carbon Bill's goal of net zero carbon emissions from 2050 to 2040.
Wake up, New Zealand! You are drowning, you are suffocating, and you are running out of time!
And some MPs are listening. Chloe Swarbrick from the Green Party told the protest it has drafted a climate emergency declaration to put to the other parties in Parliament. But the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who declared climate change was her generation's nuclear-free moment, indicated the government won't be changing its zero-carbon bill. She says it's based on the best estimates for keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen aho.
So are people heeding the call of the climate strikers? Auckland councillor Penny Hulse believes there is a climate emergency. I asked her if she went for a lie down in Queen Street at lunchtime today.
Sadly, I was at a meeting with Zone 1, Local Government New Zealand Zone 1. We were actually meeting about the subject of climate change. So no, I didn't get a chance to lie in Queen Street and join our wonderful young people in the protest.
But you are, it seems, hearing their message because they want central and local government to declare a climate emergency. Are you going to heed that call? Are you going to help them with that?
I'm taking a paper to my committee at the beginning of next month alongside our climate change action plan, and my paper will ask my colleagues to support the call for a climate change emergency declaration, and that will be done in conjunction with the signing off of our climate change action plan for consultation.
And what would that mean in practical terms to declare a climate emergency if they go for the idea?
You know, at first listen, people would think, what an empty and shallow piece of political nonsense. What it really means is that we're hearing the voices of our community and the rest of the world, really, and our youth, and saying we are in an emergency, but we're in an intergenerational emergency. We can't get away from the fact that things are changing rapidly around us and we have to adapt fast. And we also have to stop doing things that exacerbate climate change. So if you look at it in that context, it feels fine to declare an emergency. It says that we're going to put everything we do as a council, and we should put everything we do as a city through that first filter which says, is this going to make things better or worse?
So would it present any statutory or legal obligations to go with it, or would it just be making a symbolic declaration?
At the moment it's symbolic, but we are backing it up with the fact that we're also launching our climate change action plan as the start of a much deeper conversation with Aucklanders about just what the risks are, what the state of play in Auckland is, and what we need to do to address it. So we're saying let's, face up to the fact that we are in a climate change emergency, and these are the kind of things we can do. Does it mean, suddenly banning cars, putting everyone on bicycles and changing the way we run Auckland tomorrow? Absolutely not. Even though I'm sure the trolls on Facebook and on social media and on Talkback will, accuse us of that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Penny. Even though you're saying it's symbolic, it doesn't mean you're going to wipe out all the cars in the neighbourhood and all the rest of it. Do you think some of your fellow councillors, they might freak out?
Part of it is how these things are presented, and having talked to Rachel Rees from Nelson, some of the people in Christchurch, this is happening around the country, and it doesn't appear to have freaked out either the citizenry or the individual councillors. And it's a matter of having a sensible conversation about what it means. What we're really saying is we're catching up with where business is at, with where the insurance industry is at. They're certainly taking this seriously. We're listening to our young people who lay down in Queen Street today, and we're taking it seriously as the first city of the Pacific who are the communities most impacted by climate change.
Well, you mentioned Nelson Council because obviously they have acknowledged a climate emergency, as has Environment Canterbury. But do you think you can get the numbers in your own council?
I think that these things rely on, people's own personal view and on their politics. I'd hope, though, however, that most people would see that they want to be on the right side of history, that, simply making political statements about, not believing in climate change are a thing of the past, and that we all want to, face up to the fact that we have to do something collectively. Will we have the numbers? Let's see at the meeting.
Because some of these young people today, and one of them in particular, has said that the adults are asleep at the wheel. Could people in your council be accused of being asleep at the wheel, at least some of them?
I hope not. Most of the councillors are there for the right reasons. They're there to look after their communities. They just see different ways of doing it, and some people think long-term and they think intergenerationally. Some other people struggle with that. I guess at the meeting, that's where we'll, try and have those much wider conversations that are important ones for us to start having.
And that's Auckland Councillor Penny Hulse, who's taking a proposal to declare a climate emergency to Auckland Council next month. We're already getting feedback on the climate strike today. I'll get to some of that in a couple of seconds, but if you do want to have a chat to us about what you've heard on the program so far, you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And the feedback in so far, Brian says, what the protesters don't seem to grasp is that a virtual command or economy that will wreck jobs will be required for their extreme action on climate change. Steve says the first thing the government could do would be to stop secondary school students driving petrol or diesel cars to school where public transport is available. And one other piece of feedback in from, it's not signed, but this person says, I think it's fantastic that the students are expressing their voice. We all need to take responsibility to save all the world's creatures and environments. Life is precious and nature has been taken advantage of for so long. Let us know what you think on the issue. The Auckland branch of Destiny Church has been put on notice by the Department of Internal Affairs for failing to file its latest annual returns on time. The church's 27 returns paint a grim picture of the church's finances, with an independent auditor raising significant concerns about its ability to keep operating. Hannah Tamaki, who yesterday announced she would lead a new political party called Coalition New Zealand, was a trustee with the Destiny Church's Auckland branch up until last month. Nita Blake-Person reports.
And I don't say this lightly, but we will be ruling the nation.
It was 2004 when Brian Tamaki stood alongside his wife Hannah proclaiming his plans for Destiny Church. Hannah nodded along in support, and it was a similar scene yesterday as the pair launched their political party, Coalition New Zealand.
I'm not happy. I am concerned. I am worried. For this reason, I will be leading the new party, Coalition New Zealand, into the 2020 general election with the aim of entering Parliament.
Hannah Tamaki made it clear that none of the party's funding would come from Destiny Church.
And just to be clear, the funding for this political party, is any of it coming from Destiny Church?
Absolutely not.
So how are you going to fund it?
I've already had a few friends say that they would help us. We've got friends outside the church that will help us. So we've got many business people in the church. If they want to give to us personally, give to the party personally, that's their choice.
Have you signed...
Where do other parties get their money from?
Donations?
Yeah, what'll be donations? Same.
But looking at the Destiny coffers, donations to the church aren't looking great, let alone a political party. Back in 2008, Destiny Church had multiple charities registered. 18 branches across the country, as well as the Social Services Trust, a Television Ministries Trust, a school, an international trust, and a charitable company providing buildings and facilities for the church. A decade later, only about half of those trusts remain. The Dunedin, Gisborne, Kaitaia, Porirua, Taumaranui, Te Puke, Thames and Whanganui branches, as well as the Social Services Trust, were all deregistered in 2010 at the request of those running them. In 2012, its Rotorua branch and the Television Ministries Trust were both deregistered because they failed to file annual returns. Then in 2017, the Department of Internal Affairs warned that Destiny International Trust and Te Hahi o Ngā Matamua Holdings, the church's charitable company, were both due to be deregistered because of their persistent failure to file tax returns. The groups immediately took legal action, and the issue is understood to still be before the courts. But their charitable status, which allows them to accept donations and be exempt from income tax, remains in place in the meantime. That ongoing failure to file annual returns is now an issue for Destiny's Auckland branch, which Hannah Tamaki was a trustee of until last month. The trust, which is by far the most wealthy branch, filed its latest returns, which are for 2017, at the end of last September. That was 1 year after they were due. The returns paint a worrying picture for the church. Donations dropped by more than half from 2016, when they hit $4.4 million, to just $1.9 million in 2017. Despite the drop in income, the Trust's 6 management staff got a slight pay increase, with wages totalling more than $600,000 all up. An additional $48,000 was paid to employees who are close family members of the management staff. The Trust owed $170,000 in unpaid debt, and the situation was so dire that the independent auditors working on the returns stated the following.
The going concern assumption is dependent on the Trust continuing to receive donations at a level consistent with previous years. The Trust incurred a total deficit of $202,398 for the year ended March 31, 2017. And as of that date, the Trust's current liabilities exceed its current assets by $75,310. These events, along with other matters, indicate a material uncertainty exists that may cast significant doubt on the Trust's ability to continue.
Charity Services is still waiting on Destiny Church Auckland Trust 2018 returns. They are now 8 months overdue. The agency says persistent failure, which can result in deregistration, only happens after 2 consecutive failures to file. At this stage, it says it has contacted the charity about its failure to comply. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
A multi-million-dollar cycle trail project in Otago has been given the green light after more than a decade searching for funds. Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones announced a funding boost for a series of Otago-based projects in Milton this morning. Cheers rang out as the community welcomed what they hope will be a catalyst for growth in their region. Tess Brunton filed this report from Milton.
Clutha District Mayor Brian Cadogan says extending the Clutha Gold Great Ride cycle trail will be a game changer for the district. The project received $6.5 million through the Provincial Growth Fund, and Mr Cadogan says it's turned a pipeline dream into a reality.
This is just such a tonic. Finally to have the cavalry coming over the horizon. For so long now we've had hopes, dreams, aspirations that have been stymied somewhat by our ability to fund, by our ability to get the momentum. And in the Provincial Growth Fund, finally we've got someone holding hands, and it means so much for our district.
The trail at the moment only reaches the fringe of the district. The extension will wind through the hills from the former gold rush town Lawrence, through Manuka Gorge, along the floodplains to Milton, and to the lakeside township of Waihola. Once finished, the new 63-kilometre route will help link Clutha District to Queenstown Airport and be within 20 kilometres of Dunedin Airport. Steve Michelle, whose family owns the Waihola Tavern, nearby camping ground and store, says he's got high hopes for small businesses along the trail.
The pub is just such a small town. Any small pub struggles a bit in New Zealand's environment. We'd like to think it'll tip the business from about holding steady to may make it a profitable business.
Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones was welcomed to the Clutha District by a haka and song, and even joined in. He says the trail extension will boost jobs and visitors for the region. It's expected to take 3 years and more than 60 workers to build, and it wasn't long before Shane Jones hopped on a bike to mark the occasion.
Up to Shane Jones, rides to town.
But it wasn't just the cycle trail that received a funding boost. $218,000 is earmarked for a new slip lane off State Highway 1 to Rosebank Industrial Park in Balclutha, while a further $250,000 is set aside to assess the future needs of Dunedin's construction industry. Shane Jones also announced funding to assess a potential Cromwell Adventure Park and for a Dunedin-based manufacturing company to explore new wood-fire technology.
It's really important for those of us who stand up and fight for the provincial sustainability of New Zealand every single day that we spread our risks. So it's not just all in tourism, it's not just all in construction, it's not just all in a billion trees. We spread the opportunities.
Clutha Gold Trail Trust chairperson Murray Patterson says he expects more businesses will start up once visitors begin cycling through.
The amount of people that we hope to see coming down the trail, no, there's not enough accommodation and services provided at the moment. We're probably not too far away, but it will need to build on that, which will generate quite a lot of growth for the district.
Brian Cadogan says he doesn't want to put limits on the growth.
I don't want to put a ceiling on it. I see now that it's the catalyst to the sky's the limit. Who knows what? We're seeing now young people coming back and having the confidence that they can move forward. If we put the framework in place, it's for them to pick up and run with. So I don't want to put a ceiling on it.
But when will work start on the different projects? Shane Jones says contracts have to be negotiated first, but he wants tighter timeframes.
There's been a pattern when money is involved with contracts going backwards and forwards from lawyers. I would prefer the approach that you associate with the banking industry. The bank offers you capital and you have a limited time to draw it down and take it. And I'm going to put the pressure on the people who receive the pūtea from the fund. From now on, they're going to move a lot quicker.
Shane Jones hopes that pressure will get the project on the road later this year. In Milton for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tane.
And time for some of your feedback now. This on the climate strike as well. Hi, Lisa. The mass extinction and social collapse due to climate change is happening all around us already. The UN and various intergovernmental agreements regarding the issue are based on behind closed doors negotiations about politically palatable numbers, not the reality of our predicament. The kids rallying in the streets is important, but not for halting or reversing the effects of the climate tragedy, which is impossible, but for creating a dialogue about what happens next. They are the ones who will live in the ashes of this. They need to design the next world. And a bit of housekeeping as well. There is a bit of a traffic situation in Auckland. Well, what's new? On State Highway 16, it is northbound. A crash is blocking the bus lane after Rosebank Road, so you probably want to avoid that one. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, South Auckland Police sees 30 guns in the wake of shootings and gang violence. What's the draw card in Japan for our rugby players? And tornadoes cut a path of destruction in parts of the US. Do get in touch about anything that you've heard on the program today. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now, though, for the headlines with Susanna.
Thousands of children in more than 20 towns and cities skipped classes today to join protests calling for urgent action on climate change. They're part of a global movement in at least 110 countries. And the Prime Minister says she's proud of New Zealand's response to climate change, even though today's protesters called on the government to do more, for instance by toughening up the zero carbon bill. She says this puts into action New Zealand's international obligations. Engineers are investigating a 22-storey tower block in central Wellington that houses the offices of government ministers, MPs and staff for earthquake risk. Staff who work in Bowen House on Lambton Quay have just received an email advising that it may be below code. MPs for New Zealand First and the Green Party are based there, as well as Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor and Independent MP Jamie Lee Ross and support staff. The police say they've seized more than 30 guns in South Auckland in the wake of shootings and gang violence. There's been more than a dozen shootings in the area over the past year, the most recent being a fatal one in Otago last Friday. The county's Manukau Area Commander Wendy Spiller says officers have now carried out 30 search warrants and recovered guns and drugs. One of rock music's most notorious injustices has finally been resolved. For the past 22 years, the British band The Verve haven't made a penny from their 1997 hit song Bittersweet Symphony, having forfeited the royalties to the Rolling Stones. The song was embroiled in a legal battle shortly after its release because the band had sampled an orchestral version of the Stones song The Last Time. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next update of weather and news is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. You've got to wonder how much that song was worth after, 20 years, was it? 20 years?
20 years.
Bet it was a bit of cash. Speaking of which, let's go to business now with Madison Reedy. Hi, Maddie.
Hi.
Retirement village operator Ryman Healthcare. Now, their results today, I'm picking with an ageing population, they do all right?
They definitely do all right. Although this financial year they haven't done as well as previous years. So their net profit after tax was $326 million. That was down 16%. But obviously that's still a lot of money. It is a pretty lucrative business of old age. Obviously, with our ageing population, it's ever growing too. They did mention that the Auckland market, the property market has started to sour a bit. Obviously, the figures there speak to that too. So they made a valuation gain on their portfolio of $102.4 million. That's a lot of money, but it is substantially less than the valuation gain they had on their portfolio in the previous financial year, where it was $185.3 million. The revenue was up 12%. The financial year just ended. So they say that strong demand in this type of business continues. People are still buying into and moving into retirement villages around the country and in Australia. Actually, at the end of their financial year, they had just 1% of their stock was unsold. So a lot of people are obviously moving into these. And they do plan to build more villages both here and in Australia. They actually have 20 in their pipeline at the moment. Now, that's 7,000 beds that they they plan to build. That's usually how they equate things. That's how many people they could fit into
7,000
these.
across New Zealand and Australia.
Yes,
with the new
in the
ones.
pipeline. So certainly they're going to keep the construction sector ticking. And the Chief Executive, Gordon McLeod, actually cracked a bit of a cheeky joke with this one. He said that's more than Kiwi build.
That is a bit of a cheeky,
laugh at that one.
Is a bit of a cheeky joke, isn't it? Okay, on to the banks now. Now, small banks have had an opportunity to have their say on the Reserve Bank's capital plan, which you've mentioned in various business slots. This is the suggestion that they should be holding more money in their coffers. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we certainly have mentioned this one a lot. We've heard a lot about what the big banks have to say about this. They have an association called New Zealand Bankers Association, which speaks on their behalf and has obviously been pretty loud about this issue because it's a big one for them. So most of the big banks, what they have to say about the Reserve Bank's plan to make all of them hold, and especially them significantly more capital, they are obviously notoriously against this one. They say that it'll cause them to restrict lending and make borrowing more expensive. We heard from Westpac specifically today, one of the big four Australian-owned banks in this country. They said that this plan would drag down the economy, and they also mentioned hiking mortgage rates. They gave a pretty scary figure of adding $6,000 to an annual mortgage in Auckland. And they also questioned why the Reserve Bank is doing this at all. They said that other bigger jurisdictions around the world haven't moved on this yet, and that New Zealand should actually just, well, in Adrian Orr's words, watch, worry and wait rather than be the first mover on this. But up until now, we hadn't really had much noise from the smaller banks. These are the local New Zealand-owned banks. But they have made a squeak now. So this was a joint submission by TSB, SBS, Cooperative Bank and Kiwi Bank. So they are put their heads together and put through a joint submission, power and numbers there. They say that they are for a safer banking system. So in that regard, they like what the Reserve Bank plans to do here. But all of the banks have said that. They've all said, yes, a safer banking system is a good one. Although most of them are against the way that the Reserve Bank is going about it. So these smaller banks, they say that while this will achieve a safer banking system, they say that it won't actually make the banking sector fairer, which is another reason why the Reserve Bank is doing this. They want to, or planning to do this, they want to level the playing field between the larger foreign-owned, mostly Australian banks in New Zealand and the local New Zealand-owned banks. So the smaller banks say that actually won't do this. So they reckon it'll actually widen the gap, surprisingly, that exists between the local banks and the foreign-owned banks. Now, the reason they say that is because they say that they have less options to raise more capital to put into their reserves. They specifically said that they can't just, wave over across the Tasman and say, hey, Australian parent, do you mind chucking some more money over the ditch? They obviously don't have that financing backstop. So what they specifically want is an exemption from the Reserve Bank that would allow them to have less restrictions on the type of capital they can hold in their reserves. So that would be a mix of cash and assets, not just money there.
So just for them, just for the smaller banks?
Because they're less advantaged, and if the plan is to level the playing field, they're saying that that's what would achieve that. And interestingly, to segue this into politics, the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, he was with the Prime Minister this afternoon when she made a pre-budget speech in Auckland. Now, mentioning this is obviously topical for him too. He says now that the banks have all had their say, we should just let the Reserve Bank sit back and do its job.
What I look to as the Minister of Finance is to say, is our banking system safe and sound? Is it effective? And does it operate in a way that, upholds the values that New Zealanders would see? That's the balance I'm looking to see struck. I welcome the fact that the Reserve Bank has said they're going to bring some independent experts in to take a look at their proposals, along with looking at the submissions that have been made. We are still in a consultation process, and I just urge all sides of this to make sure that we go through that in good faith and keep in mind the desire we all have for a safe and stable banking system. I think banks, by and large, have accepted that there will need to be some increase in capital holdings. The debate then is about how much, over what time. That's what we now see the bank work through, the Reserve Bank work through.
And that was Grant Robertson, the Finance Minister, who's doing the rounds ahead of the budget, obviously. Madison, what's been going on the markets today?
The NZX Top 50 index closed down 0.4%. That's a drop of 41 points to close at 10,222. We followed all of the international markets down today, and that's due to the ongoing United States-China trade war dispute. The New Zealand dollar is buying at 65.2 US cents. We've bumped up a little bit there. 94.6 to the Australian and 51.5 British pence.
Thanks, Madison. Have a wonderful weekend. That's Madison Reedy with our business news. It is almost 20 to 6. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has thanked the country for giving him an historic mandate and another 5 years in office. Mr Modi and his BJP party have notched up a landslide victory and significantly boosted their parliamentary majority. The general election, involving 900 million registered voters, was widely viewed as a referendum on Mr Modi's Hindu nationalist politics. The BBC's Rajini Vaidyanathan has the details from Delhi.
Outside the BJP headquarters in Delhi, supporters are rejoicing at a victory which defied the odds. It's the first time a party's won consecutive majorities in India in half a century. No wonder supporters are deliriously happy. Some are waving flags, others are dancing and holding larger-than-life cardboard cutouts of Narendra Modi, the party's leader, who's back for a second term. Addressing a rally, the Prime Minister dedicated his victory to the people of India.
People of India have given the biggest mandate in history. I salute its 1.3 billion people.
In an election that lasted 6 weeks, the boy who once sold tea presented himself as India's strongman, who could keep the country safe from outside threats. His autocratic Hindu nationalist agenda also resonated with many across the nation. But it left others in fear. In the last 5 years, religious minorities have become increasingly marginalised in this country, with the BJP blamed for stoking the fires of intolerance. The Indian political commentator Aarti Jairath says Mr Modi has deepened the country's divides.
And he believes in the politics of polarisation. It's us against them, it's Hindus against the Muslims, it's, poor against the rich. Because if he identifies with a certain group, that group just comes out with blind loyalty and votes for him.
This was also a devastating defeat for the opposition Congress party, led by Rahul Gandhi, heir of the Nehru-Gandhi family, which once ruled this nation for decades. The political future of this dynasty is now uncertain, but Mr Gandhi wasn't being drawn into what went wrong.
Frankly, today it doesn't matter what I think went wrong. What matters is that the people of India have decided that Narendra Modi is going to be the Prime Minister. And as an Indian person, I fully respect that.
Mr Modi's victory has shaken the political landscape in the world's largest democracy. Like other nationalistic world leaders, he offers a vision of hope and national pride. But he's also reinvigorated a climate of fear and suspicion. The question people will be asking tonight: will Prime Minister Modi be able to steer a deeply divided country towards the bright future he's promised?
Rajini Vaidyanathan reporting there. An outbreak of tornadoes has left behind a deadly trail of destruction in parts of the US. More than 20 tornadoes touched down in just 24 hours, killing at least 7 people. They're part of a massive storm system which is sweeping across Texas, Oklahoma and Missouri. The capital of Missouri, Jefferson City, took a direct hit. The BBC's Ramzan Kamali reports.
The damage from yet another tornado to hit the American Midwest. According to the US National Weather Service, over 170 have hit the region this week alone. With winds reaching a speed of 160 miles an hour, some said the storm, when it hit, felt like an earthquake. The trail of destruction has been most acutely felt in the state of Missouri. In Golden City, a couple in their 80s and a 56-year-old woman died, and at least 20 people have been taken to hospital. Residents in the state's capital, Jefferson City, were urged to stay at home because of toppled trees and power lines had led to dangerous road conditions. 6,000 had been left without electricity. The state's governor said he was grateful there weren't more fatalities. He also paid tribute to emergency workers.
Just thankful for the people on the ground doing a good job. When you have chaos, it's a matter of how do you organize chaos, and that's kind of what we're doing right now, is trying to get people safe, make sure everybody's okay, still checking on people, still checking on property, and getting people on the ground right now.
According to the governor, some Jefferson City residents were still trapped in the rubble.
You got some work to do, boys.
This car dealership owner is just one of hundreds of business and homeowners who now have to start the tough job of rebuilding. But with severe weather, including heavy rain, set to continue over the next few days, that task has become just that bit harder.
That's Ramzan Kamali with that report. And it seems like a good place to have some more feedback on climate change, doesn't it? This person, Neil, has got in contact to say, nice for the kids to voice concern. It's our trading partners killing the planet and we buy it. China's still using CFCs. We can clear our waterways, sea and get diesel fumes out of town. And Davey says, I will launch a new political party. I shall call it the Extinction Party. Agenda, general extinction. Actions, none. Steady as she goes. And Bert has emailed in to say, I totally support the students and they are so right. Now we have Christchurch and Environment Canterbury and others, soon Auckland, declaring climate states of emergency. What a joke, says Bert. Take Environment Canterbury and their water management. For decades they have handed out free water to farmers, allowing irresponsible land intensification, resulting in surface and groundwater eutrophication. He goes on to say that he basically thinks declaring the climate emergency by these agencies is just a gimmick. Go for it, students, he says. Are adults allowed to join in? We'll have more feedback a little later in the show. It is about 5:45. The Imam of Al Noor Mosque says he hopes to enter local politics in Christchurch to build community relations in the city. Gamal Foda is one of 2 Muslim candidates in this year's local body elections following the mosque attacks. Both he and Muslim community advocate Zara Husani say events on March 15 inspired them to enter politics. They talked to Christchurch reporter Conan Young.
Gamal Foda became the face of the city's defiant response to the terror attack when he led Friday prayers in front of a packed Hagley Park, just metres from where so many were gunned down just a week before. If he's voted onto his community board in October's elections, he'll continue serving as Al Noor's Imam. He says he's prepared to take on 2 roles.
So I will be wearing 2 hats. One is the religious minister, which is my work, like anybody else. And the other thing is that I'll be representing the neighborhood. I'll be the strong voice of the people in there, regardless of religion or faith or colour.
Gamal Foda has had a long-standing relationship with the Labour Party and will stand for the Labour-aligned People's Choice ticket.
It will be a chance for the people to come more together and enhance the relationship between Muslim and the other people in the city or in the neighborhood. But I'm also going to be a strong voice for everybody.
Muslim community advocate Zara Hussaini has also been inspired by the events of March 15 to stand for her community board in the city's west. She says the city uniting to the point where non-Muslims are being welcomed to mosques to break the fast as part of Ramadan has been beautiful to watch. However, she admits that helping her community to recover from such a terrible tragedy has been tough.
It affected me a lot emotionally. I feel very drained, but I'm looking after myself, and thankfully there is a lot of help too. And I think it's normal. It's normal when things like this happen. If you don't get traumatized, I don't think you're a human being.
The 27-year-old arrived in Christchurch at the age of 12 with her parents, who are originally from Afghanistan. As somebody who wears a hijab or scarf, she's instantly recognisable as a Muslim and says she's experienced racism in the city she now calls home.
I've been denied a job because I was wearing a hijab, and someone was actually telling me, like, I was shopping at a supermarket and this lady came up to me and said she hates the way I dress up. And I was quite shocked. But I do hear even young students who go to school sometimes get bullied because of their hijab. So this is another reason that I think it's important that we have a representation of a Muslim woman in the community.
If she's elected to her community board, Zara Hussaini says she will throw her support behind a multicultural centre in the middle of the city. It struggled for funding before the mosque shootings, but is now being talked about as something that should go ahead so that ethnic minorities have a place to come together. Kei o te tahi aho, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
A ban on big game hunting has been lifted in Botswana, which is home to almost a third of Africa's elephants. The government says growing conflict between humans and wildlife and the negative impact of the ban on people's livelihoods is behind the move. The BBC's Alistair Leithhead has more.
There are more elephants in Botswana than any other country on earth, but that comes with its own problems. While poachers kill elephants across Africa, some ask if there are too many of them here. Living near elephants means your house can be flattened, your crops destroyed, and even your family members killed. Trying to stop conflict with humans is a big part of Botswana's decision.
Our responsibility to conservation has not changed, but our responsibility for our people as well has not changed, and we must make them part of the solution.
Hunting is not going to dramatically reduce elephant numbers, but it might push them away from some villages, and it will bring in money. Trackers and their communities who worked with hunters lost their jobs 5 years ago. Poachers recruit unemployed trackers. During the government consultation, people asked for a return to hunting.
It means our employment has come, and it means money into our pockets and food to the table. Because as we speak, these people are very poor. There's nothing, really nothing, completely nothing that they can rely on as a source of income.
Critics say luxury tourism has grown since hunting was banned, that rich tourists will be scared off, and that hunting won't stop the conflict between elephants and people.
The problem will be that elephants, angry, upset and aggressive because of hunting, will cause even more human-wildlife conflict. In Kenya, we don't have any hunting and our elephants are doing fine, and we're calling on the Botswana government to rescind that decision.
But Botswana is a big place. Wilderness areas have little attraction for safari goers, but they are perfect for hunting, which, if regulated, can bring in income for conservation.
Hunting is a tool. It's one of the spanners in the toolkit. Where photographic tourism can thrive, then it should. But, you know, here in Botswana, we have a case of many concessions that don't have that photographic potential.
Many conservationists believe killing endangered elephants is just wrong, and that opening up any trade will encourage poaching. But it's an election year. Hunting is popular with rural voters. Politics is playing its part.
And that was Alistair Leithhead. It is 9 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keep your feedback coming. We're getting lots of it on the climate strike. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd like to hear your thoughts on anything you've heard on the program today. Tributes are flowing for Judith Kerr, who enchanted generations of children with simply illustrated tales such as The Tiger Who Came to Tea and Mog, the Forgetful Cat. The author has died at the age of 95. She was born in Germany in 1923 and was forced to flee the country because her Jewish father was an outspoken critic of Adolf Hitler. Kerr, who published more than 30 books over a 50-year career, dreamed up The Tiger Who Came to Tea to amuse her 2 children. The BBC's David Solito reports.
Excuse me, can I come for tea? When a large, hungry tiger popped his head round little Sophie's door, it wasn't just the beginning of a story. It was the beginning of a 50-year career. And it had only begun because back in the 60s, tea time for Judith Kerr and her little daughter was becoming a bit lonely.
We wished somebody would come. And so I thought, well, why not have a tiger? And so that's where the story came from, really.
2 years later, it was her son who was bored with the books he was being given to read, and so Judith Kerr created the forgetful, accident-prone Mog. Her fellow children's author, Michael Rosen, today paid tribute.
She is like a stream of books gone into family lives. Millions of families have benefited and enjoyed her books. She was a wonderful, lively, witty, clever woman. She was a wonderful, wonderful person. I'm very, very sad today.
But her most personal books were the stories of her own childhood. When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit was the first of a series of books that told how she and her family had escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s. A refugee who trained as an artist and went on to marry the writer Nigel Neal, who created Quatermass, she was 45 when she started to write. 50 years later, her final book, The Curse of the School Rabbit, is about to be published. After the horrors of the Nazis, she was, to the end, grateful for a very happy life.
I'm always conscious of the fact that millions of people would give anything to be in my shoes. I've been ridiculously lucky.
And that was author Judith Kerr, who died at the age of 95, and David Solito was the reporter there. Japan is becoming a leading destination for New Zealand rugby players heading offshore due to its short season, quick flight home, and rugby that's a bit easier on the body than the bloodied fields of Europe. The money's not bad either, with former All Black Dan Carter and former Wallaby star Matt Giteau reportedly earning $2.1 million a season, with Kobe and Suntory respectively. Japan also hosts Asia's first ever World Cup this year, with the tournament kicking off in September. Rugby reporter Joe Porter spoke to former All Black, Corey Jane, among others, when he travelled to Tokyo to find out if the land of the rising sun really is a rugby pro's paradise.
How did you find the language barrier? Oh, that was hard. Like, I struggled to speak English at the best of times, so...
Jokes aside, Corey Jane loved his Japanese experience off the field.
There's just something to do on every corner. I was with my family and theme park on every bloody corner. So, we'd go to one theme park and there'd be roller coasters and all that kind of stuff. Then we'd go to Disneyland, which wasn't too far. There's Disney Sea and then Tokyo Dome. And just every weekend there was something to do for the family. It was cool.
He was there for 2 seasons from 2016 to 18, and he loved his teammates and the Japanese culture.
We always went to karaoke. Massive over there, karaoke. You get over there and it's cheap as chips. So you pay like $30, $40, all you can eat, all you can kind of drink, and you just sit on the karaoke and go crazy after a game, and that was the coolest part. Surprisingly, a lot of the Japanese guys can sing very good English songs, but they can't speak very good English.
However, on the field, it was a different story.
The hardest thing is the rugby. I was hoping my knowledge in it I'd be able to chip in that way, but it wasn't the way that they did it. I've had so much input back in New Zealand. How do I go with not having the input and just play rugby? It's tough. Like the game plan might be a frustrating one, and you're like, can we just do one more pass wide? We're going to score twice. No. We must do this first.
Rich Freeman, a Yokohama-based journalist who's played and covered rugby in Japan for 20 years, says Corey Jane's experience is symptomatic of rugby in the country.
Kids basically here are coached from the day they start playing. You're not really supposed to have an opinion other than the coaches. You'll always see them looking over at the coach. The Japanese players are so strict in what they do, and you called this move, why aren't you doing it?
The chairman of the Gaijin club in Tokyo, Tomofumi Nasuno, says the rigid structure in Japanese rugby is a reflection of Japanese society. He says it's limiting the potential of Japan's best young talent.
Hierarchy is everything in Japan, and I think that's the big reason why the JRF is so rigid, and that's why those national talents, they're just going to be a waste.
It makes things hard for coaches like former All Black Jamie Joseph, now coach of the Japan national team, to get their players to express themselves on and off the pitch.
That's how they're educated, so you get players that spent 20 years being brought up like that, and they really struggle with conflict, particularly with somebody that would be perceived as higher ranking than you.
That's changing as more New Zealand and other foreign coaches take over at Japanese clubs. Corey Jane says Japan was well worth the trip, even if the rugby wasn't.
There's so much to do. I just tell everyone, if I had to go there on holiday, if I got to choose before I played there, you think, I'd rather go to a beach or somewhere where you can go to, America and all that kind of stuff where you can see a bit more. But there's more to do there than any other places I've been to in the world. It's unreal.
And Jane says the Japanese are the kindest people he's ever met.
I lost my wallet, 2 days being there. Lost my wallet, lost my phone. It was all in one case together. I was just like, oh. Then it got handed in a couple of days later, came back, everything. Ain't coming back to you in New Zealand, to tell you that. Not with the cards and money still in there.
So while the rugby might leave ex-All Blacks feeling underwhelmed with the Japanese experience and the vast amounts of yen on offer, still make the land of the rising sun a bright prospect for New Zealand pros heading overseas. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
Let's get to some of your feedback before we go to the news at 6. Chris from Lower Hutt says the clarity, maturity and depth of understanding displayed by Wellington Climate Strike's young leaders and speakers is reassuring for the future, in stark contrast to some politicians and climate deniers. And this one, great that the students are aware of future issues, but thinking that we might be all dead in 10 years sounds like they're being scaremongered into their views. More information on timelines and scale may assist hysteria should not reign, says that person. Barbara, though, says a wrecked economy will still be preferable to a failed planet. And in respect of Penny Hulse taking a climate emergency declaration to Auckland Council, this person says the Auckland councillor shouldn't be worried if fellow councillors are freaking out. She should be concerned that they aren't. It's time to freak out, this person says. And Jean has been in contact to say we have a climate emergency, but it's not bad enough to tell people to get out of their cars. I think Penny Hulse is also asleep at the wheel, but Jean says, I hope that Auckland Council makes that declaration. We will be back after the 6 o'clock news. We're going to be talking about Otago police who've been speaking to local residents out there over concerns with a spate of violence. They have seized about 30 firearms since a number of shootings. Time for the news, though.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. Some schools are not punishing students who skipped school for climate change strikes throughout the country today. About 1,000 Auckland students lay down on Queen Street, telling adults to wake up to a climate emergency. The city's strike organiser, Western Springs College student Luke Weejohn, says students at his school were lucky to get a justified absence if they could prove they were at the strike. Other students were marked as truant. A group of Westlake Girls High School students at the protest say they were going to strike no matter what.
There are problems with attendance. With some of us it does take the percentage down a bit, but we just feel as though it's so essential to be here.
Whatever consequences that us being here will be greater than us missing one day of school. I just don't understand how you could avoid something so big that's going to affect everyone.
Today's rallies, the first of a wave of protests planned in at least 110 countries, were held in cities and towns throughout New Zealand. A 22-storey tower block in central Wellington that houses the offices of government ministers, MPs and staff is being investigated by engineers for earthquake risk. Staff who work in Bowen House on Lambton Quay have late this afternoon received an email advising it may be below code. MPs for New Zealand First and the Green Party are based there, as well as the Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor. The building, which is leased by the government, will get a final assessment mid-next week, but there is no immediate risk. Destiny Church's Auckland branch is on notice by the Department of Internal Affairs for failing to file its latest annual returns on time. Hannah Tamaki, who yesterday announced she was launching a new political party called Coalition New Zealand, was a trustee for the branch until last month. The Destiny Church Auckland Trust records show its 2017 returns were filed a year after being due in September 2018. An independent auditor, Grant Thornton, warned that its liabilities exceeded its assets, casting significant doubt on its ability to continue. The 2018 returns, which were due last September, are yet to be filed. The Indonesian police are preparing for more violent street protests in the capital, Jakarta, in response to Joko Widodo's re-election as president. Protesters have been on the streets many times in the past few days and now say they plan to march on the presidential palace. This report from the ABC's Anne Barker.
The streets of Jakarta were quieter last night after the violent riots that left 7 people dead and hundreds wounded. Police have arrested hundreds more, including 2 men from an extremist group that has pledged its loyalty to the Islamic State group. Riot police were packing up their gear, though a security presence remains ahead of a planned march from Jakarta's biggest mosque to the presidential palace. The protests have been triggered by anger at this week's election results, confirming Joko Widodo as the newly elected president against his rival Prabowo Subianto.
Anne Barker reporting. One of 2 Christchurch Muslim candidates standing for their community boards at this year's local body elections says there's a lack of diversity around council tables. A Muslim community advocate, Zara Husseini, joins Al Noor Imam Gamal Fuda in seeking to be the first Muslim on a community board in the city. Inspired by the response to the events of March the 15th, she wants to inspire other Muslim women to take up leadership roles. However, she admits that helping her community to recover from such a terrible tragedy has been tough.
It affected me a lot emotionally. I feel very drained, but I'm looking after myself, and thankfully there is a lot of help too. And I think it's normal. It's normal when things like this happen. If you don't get traumatized, I don't think you're a human being.
Zara Husseini says she has experienced racism in the city she now calls home and hopes to tackle this if she's elected. A 42-year-old man has been arrested after an early morning thieving and car ramming rampage in mid-Canterbury, which ended with 2 stolen cars being set on fire. The police say a man rammed a security guard's car while fleeing an Ashburton service station from which he had stolen items at about 4:30 this morning. They later caught him trying to commit a second burglary in Mayfield, where he rammed an officer's car. The car he was driving, which was stolen, was found alight near Mount Somers, but he was later seen in a second stolen car near Christchurch Airport. After a short pursuit, during which he avoided road spikes, the police found the second car alight nearby. A third vehicle was later pulled over by the police in central Christchurch, and the man was taken into custody. Judicial sources in France say the president of the Paris Saint-Germain football club, Nasser Al-Khelaifi, has been charged with corruption over the bidding process for the World Athletics Championship. Mr Al-Khelaifi has been under investigation since March in connection with both Qatar's successful bid for this year's championship and its failed attempt for the 2017 Games. Here's the BBC's Sebastian Usher.
At the centre of the investigation is Lamine Diack, the former head of the International Association of Athletics Federation. Mr Al-Khelaifi has been drawn into the inquiry in connection with 2 payments from Qatari investors totalling $3.5 million that were made in 2011 to a company run by Mr Diack's son. The investigating judges have accused Mr Diack of favouring Qatar's unsuccessful bid for the World Athletics Championship 2 years ago in return for a bribe. He and his son have denied any wrongdoing.
Sebastian Usher reporting. It's 6:05. The Chiefs are refusing to admit defeat ahead of their final home game of the season against the Queensland Reds in Hamilton tonight. Sitting 14th overall, the Chiefs are seemingly out of finals contention and in danger of finishing bottom of the New Zealand Conference. But assistant coach Neil Barnes is confident they will rebound from last week's loss to the Blues.
We're still on the hunt. Obviously, it's got tougher now that we've lost that game last week. We're still on the hunt, so we're going out every week looking for 5 points and nothing else has been discussed. We're not willing to consider it at this stage.
Neil Barnes. Jimmy Neesham wants to announce himself as an international bowler at the Cricket World Cup starting in England next week. The Black Caps all-rounder is heading into his first major tournament, having been overlooked for the 2015 World Cup. He says his bowling has been his focus in the lead-up.
I know that with my ability I'll always be able to contribute runs, but it's a case of trying to put as much work into my bowling as possible and trying to get that up to the standard of a genuine frontline seamer.
Jimmy Neesham. The Black Caps play India in their first warm-up match in London tomorrow night. Greg Inglis has been admitted to a rehabilitation centre as he struggles to cope with life after rugby league. The Rabbitohs have confirmed South Sydney's 2014 Premiership winning captain is undergoing treatment to assist and support his mental health. The 32-year-old former State of Origin and Test star played only 2 games this NRL season before announcing his retirement. That's the news.
Tomorrow, join me, Noelle McCarthy, in for Kim Hill. I'll be talking to Vincent O'Malley, one of New Zealand's most prominent historians, about his new book on the New Zealand Wars. Filmmaker Andrew McConnell started a project looking at surfers in Gaza. He ended up making a doco about life on the Strip. And researcher Matthew Johnson on the use of magic mushrooms in therapy. We look forward to your company tomorrow on Saturday morning on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Peninsula and Central High Country. Partly cloudy with areas of morning fog. Isolated showers from Taranaki and Taumaranui southwards, and also about the east coast from Northland to Coromandel until tomorrow afternoon. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine weather apart from some cloudy periods. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine weather. Otago and Southland, occasional showers about Stewart Island. Elsewhere, fine weather but becoming cloudy tomorrow afternoon with isolated showers late tomorrow about the remainder of the coastal Southland. Bulla and Westland, cloud increasing, isolated showers about Westland from this evening, spreading to Bulla tomorrow afternoon with rain setting into southern Westland. Fiordland, mostly cloudy with showers, rain setting in tomorrow and becoming heavy. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. You're with RNZ National. It's 6:08.
Thank you, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Thousands of students stopped writing lines and picked up signs today in a nationwide protest against a perceived lack of action on climate change. This follows similar protests in March and recent symbolic declarations of climate emergencies in Canterbury, Nelson and Kapiti Coast. Among those protesting in Christchurch were mother and daughter duo Emma and Rosie Fagg. Rosie, a Kashmir High student, told our reporter Katie Todd exactly why she was there.
Climate change is an issue, and like Greta Thunberg has said, like she's the one who started all this, and she's like, it is a crisis and we need to act like it. We need to act like our boat is on fire, like our house is on fire, because it is. And I think that it's really important that we act, because I think even though like the Christchurch did declare a climate emergency last week and I was at that as well, but I think it just means that we need to keep acting on it, like, because it doesn't actually stop. Like, they declared climate emergency but nothing has happened since then, so we need to just keep acting on it. We need something to change.
We are in big trouble, and I think recycling a bit of plastic and a bit of cardboard is not going to do the job. We have to, and it is insane. We can buy Glad wrap that is biodegradable. We can buy plastic. Hemp plastic does the same job but biodegrades, and we are still being ruled by oil and money, and it's insane. You know, in 40 years' time, people are going to look back and say, what price did they put on it? Madness. I think these kids are amazing. I just hope more will join and more schools will support and more parents will support, because it's a big issue. It's their future, not ours.
Yeah,
and
it's like we're going to die of climate change. Our parents are going to die of old age. You know, that's how people, like, if you think about it like that, it's kind of sad, and we need to just fight for it. Stand for the ground that you stand on.
What school are you from?
Kashmir High.
One concern that we have heard is that several schools have scheduled NCEA exams and things to sort of discourage students from being here today. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, my school said that they were going to, like, if teachers had like assessments and stuff, they would try and move them. But I think overall, like, our future is more important than 2 periods of education, even if you do have a test, because, like, if we don't have a future, then what's the point of educating ourselves for it?
Meanwhile, a Wellington-based CEO says he'll camp out on the grounds of Parliament for as long as it takes until the government declares a climate change emergency. Ollie Langridge, who's been sitting on Parliament's lawn during daylight hours for the past 8 days, says he's a normal guy with no political affiliation who just wants the best for the future of his 6 children. A short time ago, he told me he was grateful for the company of a few hundred others today.
Fantastic. It was really good to have the company today. Of course, it is School Strike for Climate, May the 24th globally. All eyes on New Zealand, as we're the first in the world to do this, and then it goes around the clock, around a number of countries, I believe up to 107 countries. Today was brilliant. It was just really emotional, seeing so many school children, thousands, shouting positive messages, some angry messages just coming over the hill. It made your heart skip a beat. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, so why did you feel emotional about seeing that?
It's just so nice to have young people lead this, because it's their future, and that's just so important.
So you're a dad. Were any of your kids involved in the strike today?
Yes, my 15-year-old was there from Wellington High School, and it was just lovely to see her there, and I sent that out on various social media stuff for other people to see, and just really nice. I'm so proud of her to take part in that.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some of the comments today, some of the young people are saying that it's the generation that you're part of that's asleep at the wheel. Do you agree with them, even though you are taking action?
It's a difficult question to answer, because, yes, I am taking action, direct action, by actually being outside Parliament all day, every day. But, yes, we live by certain values, I suppose, at the moment, and certain standards that may have to change if we're to go forward and actually do something about this.
So I've had a look at your Instagram account. You've had a few visitors, some of them high profile, you know, MPs, etc. Do you think anything's changing, though?
Nothing's changing at the moment, although I know that the emergency climate Climate change emergency is something that is very much on the agenda in Parliament and being discussed inside the Beehive at the moment. And it remains to be seen how that comes out. There's some very good news coming from the provinces, Nelson, Canterbury, Christchurch, likely Kapiti, perhaps even Wellington, that things are actually changing. So perhaps there's a bit of pressure on the government's under a bit more of a blowtorch than it currently is, and that's a great thing.
So what do you think the strike, the lie-in, what do you think it achieved today?
The student strike was there to, again, just put the spotlight on this issue of climate change emergency and how we need to change in order to basically survive, because things are looking quite ropey if we do nothing, as you know, and there's a lot of material out there to substantiate that, I feel.
So, Ollie, are you still thinking you're in there for the long haul?
Yes, absolutely.
And how long could that potentially be?
Hey, who knows? It might be a long winter on the front lawn of Thorndon. We'll see. I tend to be quite stubborn, but,
Yeah, are you really serious about that? Because, as you say, it's going to get quite cold and wet there sometime soon.
Yes, absolutely. We've been very lucky with the weather over the last 10 days, but going forward, that's obviously going to change. But, yes, I'm in there for the long haul.
Really appreciate your time, Ollie. Thank you so much. All the best. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Could I just say one more thing?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay, fantastic. So as from next week, the action is asking people to stand in front of Parliament, giving a bit of their lunchtime, be that 5 minutes or 10 minutes, keeping numbers, facing the Beehive, just as a silent vigil. There's nothing violent or confrontational or disruptive about it. It's just ordinary Kiwis, ordinary parents who are concerned for the future of their children. And that is one of the most important things.
So, Ollie, you are inviting people to come down and join you in their lunch breaks for whatever amount of time they can spare?
Yes, 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever. Absolutely. It's just silent, no megaphones, no shouting, no disruption, just being there in numbers to just keep up the momentum from today.
And that's a pretty determined Ollie Langridge, who's looking for company next week if you've got a few minutes to go and stand there in protest with him at Parliament. We're getting a lot of feedback on the issue of climate change. This one from David from Nelson. He says, largely symbolic actions can have great effects. Citizens encouraging individual councils to declare their areas nuclear-free pressured the Longi government to make New Zealand nuclear-free. So too can the climate emergency declaration have great effects. I am 64, says David, and very proud of our young people. This one from Michael, though, says, absurd eco-catastrophists, climate fanaticists, nonsense. Proper science contradicts these extreme claims. Doomsday cult views have been around since the 1960s, yet here we still are. These students should be ashamed of themselves. They are not leaders. Thanks, Michael, for your feedback. And this one in read, today's climate march and the economic effects. The purported negative impacts to the economy that your earlier texter spoke of are overblown, says this person. An economy comprises resources and how they are used, and we are amongst the best endowed countries for renewable energy. Redirecting resources to take better advantage of these such that our energetic foundation of our economy can be sustained will provide stimulus, while loss of jobs in other sectors can be ameliorated with proper support. Ultimately, those resisting change are doing so because of the negative impacts that they perceive to themselves. Thank you so much for all your feedback. Do keep it coming. It is 17 minutes after 6. This is Checkpoint, of course, on RNZ National. The US Justice Department has filed 17 new charges against the WikiLeaks co-founder, who is currently serving a jail sentence in the UK for jumping bail. Julian Assange now stands accused of receiving and unlawfully publishing the names of classified sources. The new charges have been criticised as an attack on free speech and journalism. He was previously charged last month with one count of conspiring with ex-intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to gain access to the Pentagon network. The BBC's Chris Buckler has the latest.
Ever since Julian Assange was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, the United States has been seeking his extradition. He sought asylum for years, claiming political persecution. But now in British custody, the US is increasing the pressure to try to ensure Mr. Assange faces the courts in America. The founder of WikiLeaks had already been accused of conspiring to hack a US government computer that led to the leak of hundreds of thousands of military documents. Now he faces 17 further charges connected to the publication of information that the US says put people's lives in danger. However, Julian Assange has very vocal supporters who believe that he is as much a journalist as a campaigner. Members of WikiLeaks claim the new indictment breaches America's First Amendment, the constitutional right to a free press, and they point to what Mr. Assange has helped to expose, including this video of a US military helicopter firing at civilians in Iraq in 2007, killing at least 10 people. The former US Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning, who's already served 7 years in prison for leaking information to WikiLeaks, was jailed again last week, specifically for refusing to testify against Assange.
I will not cooperate with this or any other grand jury. So it doesn't matter what it is or what the case is, I'm just not going to comply or cooperate.
Julian Assange is currently being held in a jail in London. The authorities in Sweden also want to question him about a rape allegation. He's expected to fight both extradition attempts. But the man who once courted publicity, even as he claimed asylum inside an embassy, knows that finding refuge this time might prove rather more difficult.
Chris Buckler in Washington. The police are telling a South Auckland community recently plagued by shootings and gang violence that they should stand up and call out bad behaviour. There have been more than a dozen shootings in the last year, most recent one being last Friday, where a man died on Piako Street in Otago. Residents have been quick to point out that the violence doesn't paint a true picture of their home and questioned what the police have been doing. But as Jesse Chang reports, the police say the community has their part to play too.
So today we're coming to you live, really in a secret location in a really newly furnished studio, right here in Otago Town Centre. Yeah. But joining us today, we have the pleasure of speaking with our local police.
It's a first for the police to answer questions about local issues through Facebook Live, and there were a lot of unanswered questions from a hui over the weekend. Mark Simeona is the operations manager at Thriving Otago, which aims to better the lives of people living in the area. He was at the hui and says people want to know what is going on.
Community came back and said, look, at the Otago hui, they said, how do we know what you're doing and how can you better visualise that to us? Because we actually don't know what you're doing. And to us, we're just assuming nothing's being done.
The area commander of the county's Manukau Police, Wendy Spiller, was one of 3 police officers who were a part of the Facebook Live. She says prior to the escalation of violence in the last 6 weeks, crime in Otago had actually been tracking down. Ms. Spiller says a lot of work is being done and staff have recovered more than 30 guns in the area.
There's been a huge amount of investigators investigating the serious offending that's occurred. Over 30 search warrants have been executed. A large number of firearms of drugs have been recovered.
A community constable is also being reinstated in the area and will start next month. Wendy Spiller is urging residents to get in touch with the police if they know people who are harbouring guns.
Gang violence and guns are unacceptable and that we don't want any in any community, but particularly in suburban and urban communities, and that the behaviour and actions that the community accept.
She says while the police can enforce the law, it's the community that sets the standard of behaviour within their own homes. Mark Simeona agrees that people need to take responsibility, but he says reporting neighbours and friends is hard.
So even though we say, yep, ring the 10-5 number, ring up the community constable when he comes on board, ring up the county's Manukau police. So even though we say these are all the places that you can go to, that doesn't mean that the people in Otago are going to do that. In fact, it doesn't mean the people anywhere are going to do that. But what we do hope is that the ones that would do.
A 21-year-old man has been charged with murder after the fatal shooting last Friday. Another 21-year-old was charged with a firearms offence. The police haven't ruled out further charges being laid. I Tamaki Makaurau o te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jesse Chang tēnei.
Millions of voters in the United Kingdom have gone to the polls for the European elections they were never supposed to be taking part in. With Brexit well overdue, the UK is obliged to participate, and it looks as though Labour and the Tories will be trounced by pro-Leave and pro-Remain parties. Meanwhile, at Westminster, Prime Minister Theresa May's leadership of the Conservative Party grows increasingly tenuous following a mutiny within her cabinet over her offer to compromise on Brexit. The ABC's Bridget Brennan reports.
At Islington Town Hall in North London, locals turned up unsure if their votes will count for much in a parliament the UK was meant to have left by now.
If we end up leaving in later on this year in October, end of October, then this is literally the most pointless waste of money ever.
What can we do? You know, it's down to the politicians and those who we put to represent the country to sort things out.
Prime Minister Theresa May voted in Berkshire. Tomorrow she'll meet with cabinet ministers telling her she must quit immediately.
Are you resigning?
The Brexit Party, led by controversial Leave campaigner Nigel Farage, is expected to storm ahead to pick up at least 30% of the vote. It's one of the oddities of British politics that a party which despises the European Parliament wants to win seats to prove a point.
What is the point of voting today for you?
Well, if you want Brexit, you've got to vote Brexit. We did it once, they ignored us, so we're going to tell them again.
Despite the fact you want to leave?
Oh, it's very difficult for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
Let's get this right, we have voted to leave, and yet 3 years on, our government and parliament have failed to deliver, they've broken all their promises, and that's why we're in these elections.
Guy Verhofstadt is a Belgian politician and the EU's chief Brexit coordinator.
There is a lot of irony that the country wants to leave and that in the end they have to organise European elections. That's the irony. But I'm quite confident that the outcome of these elections in Britain will see an enormous support for the pro-European parties.
At Westminster, Steve Bray has become known as the Stop Brexit man. In his yellow and blue top hat, he shouts "Stop Brexit" for hours on end. He's putting his support behind pro-Remain parties, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats.
Labour and Conservative are losing voters to Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Independents, and it's unfortunate that Remain parties couldn't get together because the vote is split, which gives people like Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party a footing.
Voting opens in other EU member countries this weekend. European parliamentary elections can't necessarily be seen as a barometer for local elections, but this poll is a pivotal moment for 28 nations confronting the rise of populism and nationalism in Europe.
Bridget Brennan in London. 7 bonsai trees, lovingly tended over 40 years by their 93-year-old owner, have been stolen from a garden centre in Lower Hutt. The manager of California Garden Centre, Kate Waddell, says the founder of the business, Keith Lowe, is anxious about their fate and wants to know that they're being cared for. She spoke with our reporter Ruth Hill this afternoon.
When we came in on the Wednesday morning, the gates are all locked and everything, but an internal gate had been left wide open. We noticed that locks had been pulled off it and a couple of fence palings were missing.
So were the bonsai the only things missing?
Yes, so they were definitely targeted.
Tell me about these bonsai. I understand they're decades old.
They're over 40 years old. They've been put together by the original owner of California, which is Keith Lowe.
He must be pretty devastated.
Yeah, it's because he's put his life into them and, to see them be taken, and because he doesn't know where they've been taken to, so we don't even know if they're going to be looked after or,
I know it's hard to put a monetary figure on these things, especially when you're talking about 40 years' work, but how much would you expect to pay for one of these things?
You're looking, a retail sort of price, you'd be looking at around about $2,000 per plant.
Do you think they've been stolen to order?
My hunch would probably be that they are, because it's not the sort of thing that you're going to be able to quickly go and sell at a market or on Trade Me sort of thing. That's not going to be really obvious.
What kind of response have you had from police and the public?
Because of who Keith is, and he's quite well known in the Wellington community for his bonsai and probably nationally as well, a lot of people have really got behind it. So there's a lot of sympathy for him. He's 96 and they are his babies as such. If they have any conscience at all, it would be nice to have them back.
And that was California Garden Centre manager Kate Waddell. It is pretty rough, so if you have these bonsai, return them. If you know anything about them, could you get in touch? Or if you want to pass on information to us, or you can get in touch directly with the police. But we think it's a little rough. Keith should get his bonsai back. He's been looking after them for 40 years. And before we go, just enough time for a little bit more climate change feedback. Karen has emailed to say it would be useful for the listeners to hear interviewers ask the students what they personally have done to help climate change today. Not just lying on the street. For example, no plastic, no rubber tyres, bikes and cars, no petrol or oil, recycling leftover food for lunch. The most successful revolutions are founded on a strong base of committed activators. And she says that asking other people and organisations to make rules and penalties is not the best route to cooperation or personal involvement. She says just one adjustment in each household per day would soon add to a significant outcome. Maybe that's too hard of a challenge, she says, but it is about commitment. And this one, can I just say, although this protest is raising awareness for climate change and promoting the declaration of a climate emergency, population control is just as important for a sustainable future, and we cannot afford to have 6 children apiece and expect a sustainable future. David Attenborough has promoted population mindfulness and self-moderation for over a decade. It is an important part of the conversation that we are not having. That is all we have got time for this evening. Thanks for joining us today on your radio, your TV, online, however you chose to tune in. Don't forget you can catch up on all our stories on rnz.co.nz. Back next week.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Students in at least 110 countries are continuing a movement calling for emergency action on climate change started today in more than 20 New Zealand towns and cities. Bowen House in central Wellington, where government ministers, MPs and staff work, is being investigated for earthquake risk. And Donald Trump has ordered US intelligence agencies to fully cooperate with a top-level inquiry into the origins of the Mueller investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
So we'd like to see that no New Zealander is paid less than the minimum wage.
Lately is your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
They can't operate at the same level as somebody else.
Live with local, national and international stories.